let's just get started, and we'll see what we got. I have a focus today, and it's going to be on Deuteronomy 32. However, to set context, I'm going to look at chapters between 28 and 34. Obviously, they'll go quickly. So I've done some summing up to make it go fast. All right, so this is what that looks like. I have 28 to 34 with the focus on 32. We're also going to talk about inheritance. It's going to show up in some of the verses. It's a big deal for me. Another primary subject that I noticed in these chapters was the issue of obedience. So we'll address that. There's some changes in the Hebrew text. I'm not going to get into a big textual criticism thing. I'm just going to tell you what it is and why I know it, and then you can sort it out. But it's important that you understand that it does exist. And then one of the things I'm concerned about, and this is something I'm still pressing into, but I have this concern, is that one particular change we're going to discuss actually removes a testimony or a witness of Yeshua from something that he claims when he was on earth, and that was removed from the Hebrew text that the Pharisees were using in the first century. So that concerns me. I want to bring that to your attention and tell you why I think it's important. You'll judge that. But so anyway, there are some changes in the Hebrew text. I'm going to mention two. I'm going to explain why, a little bit about what I know about it, just so that you can be aware. Some of you, I'm sure, have already come across these changes. But to some people here, it could be new. So that's why I have to go into it. All right, and then at the end, I'm going to talk about what is the cost to make sure the truth of the Scriptures is conveyed. All right, so let's get started with this. First, we're going to go through chapters 28 through 34, but we're going to start at 34 and go backwards. All right, clearly, I can't do it from 28 to 34. Cannot do that. So anyway, in 34, Moses died and there was a burial. June 9 has a dispute about that. Not sure what's going on there. And Joseph takes over. Now in 33, the blessing of the tribes takes place. You'll remember that it also took place in Genesis 49. Some similarities, some differences. Then in 31, we're going to skip over 32. In 31, it says to write a song. And so we're going to have this song executed here. So I'm going to cover some verses just to bring them to your attention. Starting at verse 12, gather the people together, men and women and children, and thy stranger within the gates, that they may hear and that they may learn, and that they may fear Yahweh thy Elohim and observe to do all the words of the Torah. Now, why did I put this verse? I'm looking at who has been invited to be present. And it says men, women, children, and the stranger. That seems like kind of like covers everybody. This is not a message to the elders. This is everybody. I was like, you can take note of that. 16, and Yahweh said unto Moses, behold, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, and this people will rise. Oh, yeah, okay. And this people will rise up and go a-whoring after the gods of the strangers of the land, where they go to be among them, and I will forsake, will forsake me, and break my covenant which I have made with them. This week, we have discussed about covenant breaking. We've talked about the greater exodus, the regathering of the tribes, and some of the problems that Israel had. I'm going to cover a little bit of it here. I have a section coming up shortly that deals with this problem. It's in pictures, but you'll get it. Then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them. And I'm going to come back to that because I have a question. And they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, are not these evils come upon us because our God is not among us? That rhymes, doesn't it? Okay, well, I didn't plan that. But anyway, this is what is being discussed here in 31 as we press toward the song in 32. 18, I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evils which they have wrought, in that they are turned unto other gods. And 19, now therefore write this song and teach it to the children of Israel, that this song may be a witness for me against them. And I want to just make a note. I am a musician, and I have found that learning a song is easier than learning a poem. Even though a song is a poem with a tune, when I have music associated with it, for me personally, I have found it easier to memorize it than just trying to do the words. So I'm wondering about that here. 20. For when I shall have brought them into the land, which I swear unto their fathers, that floweth with milk and honey, and they shall have eaten and filled themselves and waxen fat, then will they turn unto other gods and serve them and provoke me and break my covenant. You feel a pattern here. 21, and it shall come to pass when many evils and troubles are befallen them, that this song shall testify against them as a witness. And you'll see that when we get to 32, verse 1. For it shall not be forgotten out of the mouths of their seed. This is the key verse. We're talking about there's going to be trouble, there's going to be bad decisions, it's going to go on for a long time, many years, but it shall not be forgotten out of the mouths of their seed. That's a word of encouragement as I see it. For I know their imagination which they go about, even now, before I have brought them into the land which I swore. Moving on in that chapter, 27, for I know thy rebellion and your stiff neck. Behold, while I am yet alive, this is Moses now, behold, while I am yet alive with you this day, you have been rebellious against Yahweh. How much more after my death? Turns out that was an accurate statement. 29, for I know that after my death you will utterly corrupt yourselves. You know, I want to say something about Moses. He was always, in my eyes, the greatest encourager. Right? I mean, I need to hear this daily. You will utterly corrupt yourselves and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will befall you in the latter days, because you will do evil in the sight of Yahweh to provoke him to anger. Thank you, Moses. All right, let's continue backwards. We'll go to Deuteronomy 30. Now, in Deuteronomy 30, the opening 10 verses, and I will also do verse 11 at some point in this presentation. This chapter is strong for me. This chapter is strong and really lays it out. So, it shall come to pass when all these things have come upon thee, the blessing and the curse, get both, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations, where Yahweh thy Elohim has driven thee. Okay, so we are right here with this huge chunk here. When it comes to pass, have come upon me the blessing and the curse. Then at some future date, that's down the road, thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations which I have been driven. And I'm not going to get into the Hebrew with this, but if you look at it, it's kind of like Israel has lost their mind, and now they are coming back from having been insane. That's kind of what the Hebrew is talking about there. And you know there's some other passages where this type of concept takes place. Like take the prodigal son. Now he's done his thing and he's eating with the pigs, and it comes to mind that, you know, I could be doing better just going back home and being a servant and living in the barn. But even better than that is Peter gets arrested, is put in jail. He's supposed to be executed the next day. But that night, an angel shows up, lets him out, brings him out into the street, and then I'm with Nathaniel on this. He is warped out of there, and there's Peter in the street, and he's like foggy head and doesn't know what's happening. And then the text says, and then Peter came to himself and realized, hey man, I'm out here. This is really rich. This is not a vision. This is happening right now. I think I'm going to go visit some friends. And so the concept of regaining your senses, and think about Yeshua on the cross. What did he say? Forgive them, for they know not what they do. But guess what? All of you all do know what you're doing, because you have the indwelling Spirit. So we don't have the same excuse. We know what we're doing. But all these other people. So here, it is being forecast, prophesied, that they shall call to mind the blessings and the curses, and while they're where they are. So, in this situation, I want to bring to your attention, good decisions can follow on bad decisions. And isn't that what is here? We've got centuries, not decades, not generations. We have centuries of bad decisions. And then they're going to make a good decision. And I was initially disturbed about that, but I've gotten over it. All right. But anyway, I did make this bullet here. It says, good decisions can follow on bad decisions. So I'm going to take a real short little section here. This is a segue to talk about decision making. All right. And I think I can make my point. All right. In our lives, every day you make a multitude of decisions, right? It's a part of just everything. So from where I sit, here are the options. Good decisions, bad decisions. Those are the two options. All right. So I'm going to give you an example of a recent bad decision that I made. My wife and I went to a cabin up in the mountains of Virginia as Hurricane Ian was passing over where we were staying. And so on the deck of our cabin was a jacuzzi. So we got out of the jacuzzi and changing into clothes, and I wanted to put my bathing suit so it could dry, so I put it outside, hung it on a chair, went to bed, got up the next day, went out there, because I was going to get back in the jacuzzi, and I noticed my bathing suit was still wet. So I went to my wife and whined and said, my bathing suit's still wet. And so she said, okay, let me get this straight. In the middle of a hurricane, you put your bathing suit outside, and now you're wondering why it's still wet. All right, so I got over it because they had a dryer and I had another bathing suit. So some bad decisions are not as costly as others. With Israel, okay. So I'm going to show you what I call other bad examples. These are pictures. This first bad example is going to feature the animal kingdom, okay? In this picture, I don't know if this monkey is under the influence, but if this monkey has made the decision to do what it looks like he's going to do, I submit this under the category of this is a bad decision. All right, but let's move from the animal kingdom to the human kingdom, because you know we're smarter than this. We got this thing covered, no problem. I'm not so sure. I'd like to see the video clip of how he got out there, but it hasn't been published yet. All right, so one thing that we could say would be, I need to make better bad decisions. So I need to improve on my bad behavior, all right? Perhaps that's the answer, but I think the problem is I've been making bad decisions since 1969. So I think I'm like in a pattern or a rut. But God had a plan all along. Good decisions come from experience. Okay? What's the second part of this? Experience comes from making bad decisions. So if you want to get experience, continue the path that you're on. So it seems that Israel did exactly this. They made a series of bad decisions, and then at some point in time, according to the prophecy, good decisions are going to come out of it. So I am encouraged. I'm just saying. Okay, so let's get back to Deuteronomy 30. Verse 2. Once this happens, when they return from their insanity, they'll return unto Yahweh thy Elohim, and shall obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children, with all thine heart and with all thy soul. Once you have done this, then Yahweh will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations where he has scattered thee. So, me being Greek-minded, I tend to do chronological thinking. So what I take away from verse 2 and verse 3 is that once Israel comes to this place where they make that change, then our Heavenly Father is going to act. But he's not going to act until that change takes place. So that's how I'm seeing chronologically how these verses fit together. So I want to, because there is numerous places where there's discussion about being scattered, I want to give you some verses just so that you can see them. And we're going to cover a lot of different books. This is Leviticus. If you will not for all this hearken unto me, but walk contrary to me, I will scatter you among the heathen. In Deuteronomy 4, similar, when you'll beget children and grandchildren, you'll have remained in the land, long in the land, and you shall do evil in the sight of Yahweh to provoke him to anger, then Yahweh will scatter you among the nations. It's very consistent. You'll see it as we go. Of course, 28, if thou will not observe to do all the words of the Torah that are written in this book, and fear this glorious and fearful name, Yahweh thy Elohim, you'll be scattered among all the people. 32, which of course we will get to. I said that I would scatter them. 1 Kings, Yahweh shall smite Israel and root up Israel out of this good land which he gave to their fathers, and shall scatter them because they provoked him to anger. Nehemiah 1, remember, I beseech thee the word that thou commandest thy servant Moses, saying, if we transgress, I will scatter you. Seems to be that connection there. Psalm 44, thou hast scattered us among the heathen. That might have been written during the Babylonian captivity, don't know. Jeremiah 9, Yahweh said, because they have forsaken my Torah, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, neither walked therein, but have walked after the imagination of their heart and Balaam, which their fathers taught them. And I put this verse in here. It's in the text there. The wormwood and the gall. I thought that was, Yahweh of hosts, God of Israel, behold, I will feed them, even this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink. And it ends with, I will scatter. Jeremiah 31 also has that. Hear the word of Yahweh, O you nations, declare it in the isles far off, and say, he that scattereth Israel will gather him. So now we have the first here of an encouragement. Everything is negative, and now we have a negative and positive together, so that's good. Ezekiel 6 also, yet will I leave a remnant, that you may have some that shall escape the sword, when you shall be scattered. Ezekiel 36, later on in that book, I scattered them among the heathen, and they were dispersed through the countries. Zechariah, I scattered them among all the nations whom they knew not. Thus the land was desolate. I wanted to bring this up because the land is these actions are going to cause the land to be defiled. That is a problem. And it has to be sorted out. But you're going to see it has been sorted out, and it's in the text, and we'll get to it when we get to 32. Going over to the apostolic writings, we have John here. And this is Yeshua should gather together in one the children of God that are scattered abroad. Sounds like to me he's going to be involved with the regathering. And then James, we'll talk more about that. I have another verse. James 1, this is writing a letter. We believe this letter was written in 40 A.D., so it's the first writing. And it says, this is being written to the 12 tribes which are scattered. So I just wanted to make that note. So these are some of probably many more verses that deal with Israel misbehaving, losing their inheritance, being scattered. So this is just a sampling, maybe 10, 12. So back to Deuteronomy 30. If at any time, if any of thine be driven out into the outermost parts of heaven, so it doesn't matter how far out they've been scattered. 5, and Yahweh thy Elohim will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it, and he will do thee good. So here's the blessing section. 6, he will circumcise your heart, which is really important because it wasn't circumcised. So that is a big deal. The heart of thy seed to love Yahweh thy Elohim with all thy heart, soul, that thou may live. 7, Yahweh thy Elohim will put all the curses upon thine enemies and on them that hate thee, which persecuted thee. So while this is not going to be covered in this particular presentation, there is a record, especially in Ezekiel, and there could be some other prophets that speak to this too, that after Israel is punished, then the punishments are going to now turn and go on to the nations that were involved in helping punish Israel. So, for what that's worth, it looks like verse 7 is kind of like predicting that. Verse 8, and thou shalt return and obey the voice and do all his commandments, which I command this day, and Yahweh will make you plentiful across the board. But here's the catch. Once again, I said this before. God is a mathematician. He works with logic. And verse 10 is logic. This is programming logic. If this is true, then. If not, then. God uses it throughout the Scriptures. Me being a programmer, I use it a lot too. So, verse 10 is the programming verse, and it says, if thou shalt hearken to the voice of Yahweh thy Elohim, to keep his commandments, his statutes, which are written in the book of the Torah, and if thou wilt turn unto Yahweh thy Elohim, notice how he's nested the F's together. First F is hearken to the voice, to keep the commandments and statutes. The second if is nested under that. You get true in the first one, you got to get true in the second one. If thou turn to Yahweh with all thy heart and with all thy soul. So then he goes on to talk about how that's going to work. So that if you don't do that, then you're going to get the negative side of that equation. And he does this throughout the Scriptures. That makes it really easy for me to read. All right, so that's all I'm going to cover in 30 until we get to verse 11 down the road. I want to continue going backwards now and move to Deuteronomy chapter 29. These are the words of the covenant which Yahweh commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. Notice the person. This is another narrator. This is not Moses writing this. Someone else wrote this later and inserted it here to start off chapter 29. Just wanted to bring that to your attention. Verse 4, note, Yahweh has not given you a heart to perceive, eyes to hear, eyes to see, ears to hear unto this day. When I first read this, I was like, I know this, but I'm still shocked. We are at the water. We are getting ready to go over to gain the inheritance. Moses is getting ready to move on. Joshua is getting ready to step up. So all of those pieces are in place. And I don't know, are we days away? I mean, we've got to be close. Got to be close. And in verse 4, it's just want to let you know that God has not given you a heart to perceive, or eyes to see, or ears to hear unto this day. So the entire time from coming out of Egypt, first generation, this is the second generation getting ready to go into the land. Up at this point, you don't have the ability to perceive, eyes to see, and ears to hear. Maybe we could improve on that. 5. I've led you 40 years in the wilderness. Now that we're back to Moses being the writer here. And when you come to this place, do you remember this just happened? We got this king, we got Og, and they came out against us, and we smote them. 8. And we took their land and gave it for an inheritance to 2.5 of the tribes. Therefore, keep the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all that you do. You stand this day, all of you, before Yahweh thy Elohim, you captains of tribes, elders, officers, all the men of Israel. Who else? Little ones, wives, the stranger. Once again, we have this passage that makes it clear that everybody is invited to hear what is being said here. And there's other verses that address that as well. We got the hewer of the wood and drawer of the water. That's really interesting, considering what's going to happen in the next book. 12. That thou shouldest enter into the covenant with Yahweh the Elohim, and into his oath, which he made with thee this day. 13. That he may establish thee today for a people unto himself, that he may be unto thee an Elohim, and as he hath said unto thee, and as he hath sworn unto thy fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Reiteration. Remember that this text, and you all do know this, every 7 years it was put in there, get together, read the thing, everybody hears it every 7 years. So these things are frequently a reiteration of history. This is what has happened, and I'm just reminding you. Of course, we get to do it every year. It just happens to work out well for us. But at least in the text, it says that they need to do this every 7th year. Continuing in chapter 29, this builds on the other one, which was really good. Neither with you only do I make this covenant and this oath, but with him that standeth here with us this day, and also with him that is not here today. So now we have a chronological statement that, okay, we're going to cover the group here, but also I want you to know, down the road, there's other people, so I'm making this covenant, so this is not just you. So 15 makes that clear here. I like it. 18, lest there should be among you man or woman or family or tribe, whose heart turns away this day from Yahweh thy Elohim, to go and serve the gods of these nations, lest there should be among you a root that beareth gall and wormwood. Remember that was quoted recently? Part of a punishment. Continuing in verse 19, and it shall come to pass, when he heareth the words of this curse, that he blesses himself in his heart, and says, I shall have peace, though I walk in the imagination of mine heart, to add drunkenness to thirst. So I have defined this as standard self-deception. And, if you look up the definition about deception, a person cannot know that they're deceived. Think through that. A person cannot know that they're deceived. And so that puts us in dangers if we're not asking questions. My assistant pastor has passed away, actually earlier this year, I think. He passed away. But I remember when he came to me and he said, I need to be able to trust you will speak into my life the correction that I need because I can't see the need myself. I have to know that you're willing to do that. Okay. We need to have that person that you can trust to the highest level and beyond. Because syncretism gets in there, and sometimes when it first gets in there, it's kind of difficult to discover. It's kind of difficult, yes, we all do the James, stand in front of the mirror, do the Torah overlay. I got that. I understand that. But still, we need to be able to know that there's somebody who is watching over us and can speak directly into our lives, and we've already asked them to do it. And so that's a good arrangement. Do you have that person? I'm just saying I think it's a good thing. I do think it's a good thing. All right, continuing on into 20. Yahweh will not spare him, but then the anger of Yahweh and his jealousy shall smoke against that man, and all the curses that are written in the book shall lie upon him. So you can see that when you are deceived that way, and listen, when you look at not just the eldership of Israel right before the Babylonian captivity, but even some of the people and the things that were going on when you study the temple area right there, and when Yahweh leaves the temple, and those things. And you have read it, because that's when the spaceship, comes down, the wheel in the middle of the wheel and all that stuff. So you've read the text. And this is where Yahweh just gets fed up and leaves. He says he's going to leave. He does leave. So this is why we need to be sure. And the only way to be sure is not to assume that everything I do is perfect every day. I've talked to people and they've said, oh yeah, I got this. There's nothing I believe that's incorrect. Oh, okay. I pull up my phone and they say, what are you doing? I said, I'm removing you from my contacts list. I don't want to be in that place, because if I had a little plaque, I could sit here and it says, truth does not stop here. I need to know when I miss the mark. I depend on the body to assist me. It's like a project. All right, continuing. 21. Yahweh shall separate him unto evil out of all the tribes of Israel, according to all the curses of the covenant that are written in this book. And you'll notice when you're reading about the regathering is that once they have come to their senses and that Yahweh has started the process and is beginning the gathering, it says that he's going to cause every one of them to pass under the rod. So there's stuff going on there. Things to consider. Next verse, 22. So that the generation to come of your children that shall rise up after you, and the stranger that shall come from a far land. Have you noticed how many times the ger, that's the Hebrew for stranger, has been mentioned here? Very much interesting. From that far land shall say, when they see the plagues of the land and the sicknesses which Yahweh hath laid upon it, and that the whole land thereof is brimstone and salt and burning. And just so for the record, historically speaking, many nations would go in and destroy and take captive the people, and then they would take the land and they would do things to it to keep it from being able to grow produce anymore. So they would destroy the land. It was general practice. All right, let's see. Salt burning that is not sown, nor beareth, nor any grass grows therein, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah and some other places when he was angry. So I'm making a note here. The land is now defiled and needs purification. Like I said, we're going to address that when we get to chapter 32. Now, this next one here, I got my special effect here. Era. I'm asking you, is there an era here? Okay, I'm seeing something and it's not adding up. We can address it in Q&A, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention that this is how I'm seeing it. Now, this is a section here in Deuteronomy 21. I think the problem is it disagrees with 32:27. So we'll get there. We're going to cover 32:27. I'm going to say, you remember when I put up era? All right. So look what it says here. Even all the nations shall say, this is Yahweh speaking now. He knows that the punishment's going to take place. Got that covered. There's going to be punishment. Okay. So now listen to what he has to say about the nations who are there when the punishment takes place. He says, the Almighty says, this is what he says the nations will say, wherefore hath Yahweh done this unto this land? What meaneth the heat of this great anger? Then men shall say, because they have forsaken the covenant of Yahweh Elohim of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them forth out of the land of Egypt. For they went and served other gods and worshipped them, gods whom they knew not and whom he had not given unto them. And the anger of Yahweh was kindled against this land to bring it upon it all the curses that are written in the book. And Yahweh rooted them out of their land in anger and in wrath and in great indignation and cast them into another land as it is this day. Really? That's what God thinks the nations are going to say. Now, when we get to 32, I'm going to ask you this question again. So be ready. I also wanted to note here, you've noticed I've highlighted as it is this day. Obviously, it wasn't that day, so that means the narrator was involved outside of what Moses wrote here. Just bringing that to your attention. And this is a verse that ends the chapter, so I put it in. The secret things belong to Yahweh our Elohim, but those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children ongoingly, that we may do all the words of Torah. So, the things that have been revealed to us, well, I get the impression I need to find out what they are. So I need to put some effort into finding out what they are. And sometimes the effort is a small package, but there are other times when the effort's a large package. So as an example, I may actually talk about this a little bit more later in the feast. I've been working on a project. I didn't have time to finish it for this particular feast, but I will finish it next year, I hope. Sometimes I need to research the meaning of a word, but I don't need to do it from the standpoint of what the English translation is. So I'll have to look up the word in the Greek, especially if it's in the apostolic writings. If it's in the Torah, I'm going to look it up in the Septuagint as well as the Hebrew. And if it's in the writings of the prophets, I'm going to look it up in the Hebrew as well as the Old Greek. So I got the Septuagint for the first 5 books. I got the Old Greek for everything else. And then I have the Greek of the apostolic writings. And then sometimes I have the Greek of other writings in the 1st century, 2nd century, etc. So I may have to look up a word to see its use through context of 300 different passages, just to know how that word was used by all the people who wrote and used that word. That's a Bible study. And so I like to take the position that God has gone to a lot of trouble to make his revelation known, and would hope that I, as a child, would have a burning desire to learn him and the revelation that he's given. And I know it's going to cost me, but I signed up for first fruits, so it's in the contract that you signed. So that's why I think that 29 is an outstanding verse. Yes, there are things that are hidden from me. Don't have a problem. There's things hidden from Yeshua. He doesn't have a problem. But the things that have been revealed, I want to be, in God's eyes, I want to be one of those people who, when God's having a chat, you know, Job 1 and 2, and him and the adversary chatting, and he says, so what you been doing? He says, I've been walking up and down the earth. And he says, have you seen my servant Lee? He really likes to study. That's where I'm going. That's the testimony I want to have. So that's an encouragement. All right, let's go to the last chapter before chapter 32. This is Deuteronomy 28, blessings and curses. You all are familiar with this. I don't know how many verses I have here, but probably a few. It shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken, math, logic, programming. If thou shalt hearken diligently to the voice of Yahweh thy Elohim, to observe and to do, seems clear, all his commandments, which I command this day, he will set thee high above on the nations, and then you get all these blessings and all this other stuff, and there's a lot of lines of blessings. This is blessed, that's blessed, this is going to overflow, and blah, blah, blah. But we have another nested if statement. Here it is. And overtake thee if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of Yahweh thy Elohim. So I'm reading this and I'm going, everybody had this, and nobody saw it. Look at the life of Israel. Very few saw this. Very concerning. 15, we are finished with the blessings. Let's have some curses. It shall come to pass, if thou wilt hearken to the voice of Yahweh thy Elohim, to observe to do all his commandments and statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. So, it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice, to observe and do, then this is what's going to happen. So, I'm not going to go through all of that, but for those who are familiar with the reign of Manasseh, a second curse was added during the time of Manasseh. It's referred to by Paul in Galatians chapter 3, where Yeshua took that curse upon himself at the cross. It's a different subject, but Deuteronomy 28 is the key to it. And Deuteronomy 28 also has the blessings and curses that relate to the Babylonian captivity, but there are two different sets of blessings and curses that are executed from Deuteronomy 28 for Manasseh, curse 2, which was still in effect in the first century, and the Babylonian captivity. That curse came to an end. And you can see that when you read it in Deuteronomy 28. It says it came to an end. And then it says the other one didn't come to an end. So it's just kind of intermixed. So you'd have to study that out, which I'm currently doing. But here, Deuteronomy 28 is probably one of the best records of blessings and curses. So now let's go ahead and get into Deuteronomy 32. Give ear, O ye heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. This statement begins Yahweh's case against Israel for covenant disloyalty. And this happens to follow standard ancient Near East, that's A-N-E, ancient Near East covenants when they wrote them out. So I made the note here because everybody can get this when the presentation's over. A&E covenants, generally speaking, include a formal invocation of divine witnesses. And what do we know about testimony and jurisprudence in Torah? Should be 2 or 3 witnesses, right? Well, here's 2. Heavens, earth. All right, so heavens. Well, we got Romans 10. Paul's talking about the heavens declare the glory of God. That's Psalm 19, 1 through 4. So we got the part of the heavens, and there's other stuff in heaven going on too. But what about the earth? Well, I think within the last 200 years, the earth has started testifying because a lot of digging is taking place, and they are uncovering stuff every week now. It just falls on my desk every week, some new discovery from the scriptures, from the earth, that aligns with the scriptures by going to the government writings of other nations at the same time and in the land that interface with Israel. The names of the people are the same. I'm not talking about 3. I'm talking about dozens. I have them all. Dozens where they line up. So the earth is testifying, and listen, it's better than Law and Order. And I'm a fan. Okay? All right. So we got the cosmic witness. By the way, remembers in Ephesians 10, and not to take anything away from Paul when he's talking about you are a living epistle, because unbelievers don't read the Bible, they read you. So I'm with them, I support Paul. But in verse 10, it talks about your life as you live it as the gold standard of humanity right here, right now, is for the witnesses in heavenly places, the host of heaven. It says that in the text. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Cosmic witnesses, and Paul's talking about it. 2, we've got the metaphor of nourishing moisture. 3, I've extolled God. 4, he is the rock, his work is perfect, all his ways are just, God of truth, who is without iniquity. By the way, I looked up the Greek word here because I wanted to see if it was anomia, but it's not anomia. It's a completely different word, as you can see there. And the definition of this Greek word is disregard for what is right. So that tells me that God has established what is right, and that there are some people who disregard that. After I finish my study on anomia, that's going to take a time because it's over 300 usages of it across the Scripture. I don't know how much of this here because I haven't looked it up yet, but I want to look this up because I want to see when their words are used together in the same verse and other relationships there. I need to know about those two words because they're going to be important. All right, verse 4, he acts with blameless integrity. So we've got some good attributes. You want to know about God and his attributes? He fills out a form for a job. Pretty good, huh? But now, the problem in a nutshell with Israel. Israel acts corruptly. They act without integrity. They're blemished. Yahweh's reliable, but they are perversely unreliable generation. I pull this directly out of the Hebrew. All these words directly out of the Hebrew. 5, Yahweh is upright. Israel is twisted. Twisted is in the Hebrew. Is he not your father who begot you? Is this the way to repay Yahweh? That question is asked. Evidence for Yahweh's faithfulness is also listed. And look at these texts here. Remember the days of old. So, what was that assignment? Write this song so that in the days to come, the children's can review stuff that took place in the past. So you can see the whole thing. So that's what 7's talking about. And so here's our first rabbit hole. We're going to go through verse 8. And we're going to look at this from the Masoretic text. It says, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, we're talking about Genesis 10 and 11, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. This is how your English texts read. Very few. If there were 5 people in this room right now whose text didn't read that, I would be surprised. Okay? So now I'm going to read the LXX version, which is the Greek, and I'm going to read the Hebrew version, which came out of the Dead Sea Scrolls. All right, so first let's go with the Greek. He set the bounds of the people according to the number of the sons of God. That's the Greek version. Let's read the Hebrew text that's 1,300 years older than the Masoretic text. In other words, 300 BC or 400 BC, which they found in 1947, more than one. It says, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the sons of God. So, why the change? I'll tell you why the change. If there was anything learned in the Babylonian captivity, is that we need to have no more worship of false gods, because it's not working out. So, what that means is that if there's a powers in heaven problem, we can't allow that. It has to be God only. And so, they went to work to change the text. Here's an example. Many of you have read this particular Isaiah prophecy before. I've put some of it in here just so that you could identify where this is. Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name should be called Wonderful Counselor, and there's a bunch of other names in the Hebrew. You all have read, most of you have read this, right? Let's take a look at how the Greek is written. A child is born to us, a son is given to us, whose government is upon his shoulder, and his name is called the Messenger of the Great Council. Slightly different. Multitudinous number of changes like that. Whenever there's a powers problem in heaven, the text will be changed. I'm going to give you my particular Hebrew Bible that I use, which is a Hebrew interlinear, which takes into consideration the most recent discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I'm going to show you that. I've taken a couple of pictures. Right here you can say Israel, sons of. So that is, if you look at the text, it says, Most High nations, when to divide peoples by the number of sons of Israel. And I've highlighted sons of Israel with my red line there. But if you look over to the right side, you'll see in footnote 8, it talks about the Masoretic text. And you can see the asterisk there, 8, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So let me pull that up in the second screen that I made larger. It says Masoretic text. That's what you just read. That's what you just saw in the Hebrew. But the Dead Sea Scrolls, see all Septuagint, also the Septuagint, which is the Greek of the 5 books, sons of God. And then you see asterisk 8. The Dead Sea Scrolls read sons of God. So what this tells me is that, and I can say this because I've studied the powers in heaven problem from the Masoretic perspective, And I understand coming out of Babylonia that you do not want to continue in bad behavior. I got that too. But I get concerned when people change the text and don't tell me. That concerns me, because I would like to be able to put faith into the translators who translate this for me so that it accelerates my study. Because I can tell you right now, when I'm reading English, I can do pretty good. But when I got to translate the Hebrew and the Greek, I go pretty slow. So this may be an unrealistic expectation, but I really like for these people to translate things correctly. And if you're going to make a change, let me know. I'm okay with that. But when you make the change and don't tell me, now I get upset. And now I have to go through anger management. And then I have to go through a cup of tea. And it slows me down. And I'm just going to give you another example. This is not just a problem with the Torah writings and prophets. This is a problem in the apostolic writings too. And I'll tell you one of the ones that's the worst, because I don't have any of them in here. In Colossians 2:17, Paul makes a comment, the festivals and new moons and Sabbaths are shadows of things to come. That's what the text says. But if you buy the NIV version, it says the festivals and new moons and Sabbaths are shadows of that which were to come. So the verb in Greek is present tense, but they changed the translation from that to past tense to give the impression to readers that the feasts have been done away with because the shadows are gone. So the shadows are fulfilled, everything's done. So they were a shadow, but in AD 60, they're not a shadow anymore. Now, if you're going to make that change, I will only yell at you a little bit. But the least you can do is to put an asterisk or a footnote or italics or whatever works for you when you're making your Bible translation to let me know you made this change so I can go to the Greek and say, oh, okay, well, I don't know if I buy that. I need that. I don't care if it's unrealistic. That's what I want. And I'm not going to take anything less. So I bought a book about the making of the NIV. Because I was there in Tennessee, Nashville, 1975, when the New Testament came out. I was there and got it. Yeah, whatever. So there was a book, The Making of the NIV, and so I bought it and I read it. And there's a chapter that says, where the text doesn't agree with the KJV and some of that other stuff. And the text said that when the committee got together to decide on each verse how they were going to translate it, if the verse said something that doctrinally the group did not agree with, they said, well, we're just going to change it. And I'm like, you remember the monkey and the lion? I felt like the monkey at that time. I needed to hit somebody. Okay, anyway. I also wanted to add this archaeological reference because I know that not everybody is into archaeology as much as I am, but look at this. From the 4th century BC religious text of Ugarit, I believe is right. It demonstrates the number of sons of the Ugaritic parent gods, Theritu and Ilu. The actual reading is the 70 sons of Theritu. And the text also adds, at the beginning of the world's history, each of the 70 sons had received an inheritance. Does that sound familiar? We're looking at verse 8 of chapter 32. It's the exact line up. And here's the reference. It's in French. Vestis Testamentum. Brill is the publisher from 1963. My library has it. That's why I can do this. And I just want to make this note. Interesting Canaanite myth built on the truth of the Scriptures. In other words, what they took away from the text lines up with what the text says from the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm like, wow, cool. Another reference. This is the reassessment of Asherah, and with further considerations on the goddess. Here's the author. It's in the series called Ugaritic Studies 2, Atharat in the Elimelech tables of Ugarit. And this is available. You can get it. There is a PDF. Okay, my library has the PDF because I went there today and looked. And this is what the book looks like, the reassessment of Asherah. It talks about these things. And the PDF is $179. That's a little pricey, but that's why I go to my library when I need something like that and check it out. It doesn't cost anything. So I recommend that you visit your library once a month. Continuing 32, Yahweh's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. We just talked about that from the Canaanite myth. 10, found in desert land, he instructed them and made them the apple of his eye, like the eagle teaches their young. Yahweh said, me only, no other gods needed. He also provided them the best. If you've looked at some of the blessings, they're really over the top. I mean, really over the top. And it did not work out. As you can see in verse 15, he waxed fat, kicked, thou art waxen fat, thou art grown thick, thou art covered with fatness. I got it. Then he forsook God, which made him and lightly esteemed the rock of his salvation, which ended up being bad behavior and decisions. They provoked him. Jealousy with strange gods, with abominations provoked him to anger. They even sacrificed to demons and not to God. Gods they knew not. Notice this. This is a pointed note to us. They sacrificed to demons. We got that. Okay. And not to the Almighty. We got that. Gods they knew not. Okay, they were new gods. Their fathers did not know. So this means that we're talking about the current group. We're not talking about the Egyptian group. We're not talking about the judge group. We're not talking about the Saul group. We're talking about the now group. I picked that up. I wanted to bring that out. They became unmindful and forgot God. And one could say they made a lot of bad decisions, which you know what that looks like. All right, continuing, 19 to 25. When God saw this, he was upset and he spurned them. He said, I will hide my face. Isn't it interesting in Acts, when the whole thing's coming back together? You remember chapter 15, the Jerusalem Council? What did James say? He started off with, I will return. He left, he turned his face, and then he left. And James says, I will return. Looking good to me. They provoked me. I'll provoke them. I'm very angry. My treatment of them will be very bad. All right, getting close to the era text now. There, Yahweh talks to himself. Okay, and here is a discussion of that in verse 26. I would scatter them into corners. I would make the remembrance of them to cease from among men. And we've already done the scatter verses. But then he says, were it not that I feared, God says, I fear the wrath of the enemy. All right? Lest their adversaries should behave themselves strangely, and lest they should say, our hand is high, and Yahweh has not done this. Now, how does that line up with, well, the nations, when I do this, they're going to say, oh, wow, this is because they disobeyed the covenant, and God had to punish them because of the terms of the covenant. And here, I would scatter them and punish them really bad, but I'm not going to do it because I'm scared to death of the pagans. Because they're going to say that they did this and not me. So, yeah, work on that. Process that for a while. Get back to me. All right, continuing, we're at the end. 30 to 42, Yahweh's multiple expressions of destruction. Read it for yourself. Last verse is 43 and is also rabbit hole number 2. And this is the solution to the problem that was unacceptable in the first century because the Pharisees were using the wrong Hebrew text. In verse 8, we once again find the removal of sentences due to the issue of powers in heaven. Masoretic text for verse 43. Rejoice, O you nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants. He will render vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful unto his land and to his people. Well, the way that text looks, it looks like God is doing this. But if we go back to the LXX and the Dead Sea Scroll Hebrew, which is my next slide, take a look at the difference. Rejoice, ye heavens, with him, and let all the angels of God bow down to him. Rejoice, ye Gentiles, with his people, and let all the sons of God strengthen themselves in him. For he will avenge the blood of his sons, and he will render vengeance, and recompense justice to his enemies, and will reward them that hate him, and the Lord shall purge the land of his people. So here the solution is, if you don't take out the power of heaven problem, you can see that Yeshua is the one who is going to fix the land of its defilement. But if you take it out, then the Hebrew text in the first century doesn't have Yeshua doing that. So when he makes the statement, it's a false statement because they're working with a Hebrew text that's been changed and they don't have the correct text. That concerns me. That concerns me. What if I was one of those Pharisees? I'm going by what the text says. Nobody told me they changed this. It's a problem. He says, John 10:16, and other sheep. This is Yeshua. Other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice. And there shall be one fold. Everybody think about Ezekiel 37. There shall be one fold and one shepherd. Looks like to me Yeshua's there. And then, if that's not enough, add the high priest. Yeshua should gather together in one the children of God that were scattered abroad. Good golly day. Is that not exactly what we're talking about with the regathering? And Yeshua is putting himself there, and his support as a witness in the Hebrew text has been removed. That's a problem. He will purge the land of his people. So, here we are. Looking back, was obedience to the Torah unrealistic? I think not. Let's see if we can find a verse that might speak to this. For this commandment, which I command you today, is not too difficult. Do I need to say anything else? With perfection not possible, a system to reset was included. We understand that. Priesthood, sacrifices. Continuous evil intent. This is what I think was the real problem with Israel. Continuous evil intent was the real problem of the heart of the people. And you notice that in one of those verses it says, he hasn't given you the opportunity to perceive things, to be able to see things, to be able to hear things. And what did Yeshua say to the disciples? He says, I am going to be very careful about what I say, and I'm going to use parables so that I can continue to hide all this stuff from the leaders. You, ask me anything. I'll tell you anything. But them, I'm knowingly and purposely going to hide it because they've been made blind by the curse. That's the Manasseh curse. So when I look at this, continuous evil intent was the real problem of the heart of the people. Their hearts weren't circumcised. No wonder they can't get this right. All right. So the history of Israel. Look at this. Rebellion, distant past. They were in Egypt. That was a problem. The first generation, we know what happened to them the next year. Second generation, wasn't the gold standard. Recent past, you got Israel in the land. You know about that. And then they got punished because you know how the land vomits stuff out. Okay, so that happened. So now they're in exile. And there's going to be a future transformation, Israel in the desert of the people. And that's when they're going to go under the rod. So, you know, this whole thing in 28 through 34, as you just saw, is reiteration after reiteration of what you've done, what I've done. I'm speaking on behalf of God. I've tried to make things work for you. I've tried to do everything I could to get everything together so that we could get this right, and it has not worked. And here we are, still not working. Curse still in place. People can't see. People can't hear. People don't ask questions. They don't care. It's not a good picture. Don't want to be associated. So, here's my summary. What does it cost to make sure the truth of the Scriptures is conveyed? We better find out what the Scriptures are really saying. It's our responsibility, because if we are really thinking back to what I said in the middle of the presentation, unbelievers do not read the Bible. They read you. How's it working out? I think it's something we have to be conscious of daily. And we need to have that person. If you can have this person, I'm not going to say you have to do it. I'm saying if you know you have this person in your pocket and that at any point in time you can go to them and you can discuss, I did this, I made this decision, and you know that they're going to tell you the truth, straight up, very little bush beating. That's good. I like that. Works for me. Especially as a congregational leader, this happens to me a lot. People think, okay, listen, this happened, and then this person showed up, and then I had to do this, and I had to make a decision, so I did this. What do you think? Well, I wouldn't have done that. Doesn't have to be a sermon, and then break it down for them so they can understand how you're thinking. And once again, let me just say it again if I haven't said it enough already. I know I don't have everything right. That's not a problem. Neither do you. There's nobody in here that has everything right. Otherwise, you'd be up here. We'd all be on, So, but we're all moving in that direction. So, I think that's a good place. But I just want to encourage you over and over and over until you're tired of hearing of it, that we need to know what we're talking about. And to do that, you're actually going to have to get involved with the text. You know what happened? I gave that presentation on who are we and what we believe. And I was going through the situation about the people in the first century. But one of the things I didn't say was that when you go and look at the history outside the scriptures, they were known as the people of the book. And they were attached to Israel. I've got some others too, but those were the two that have stuck with me. And that's exactly where we need to be. It's exactly where we need to be. Thank goodness for 7 days, and then we're at it again, understanding how to apply it. It's just an absolutely exciting time.